Is Excel dead? Love it or hate it, with over 750 million users, Microsoft Excel has become the most widely used tool for working with data in the world. For many people, Excel has enabled them to get involved with data and automate hours of manual tasks without having to come from a technical background. The new power features of Excel enable users to quickly carry out analysis and build up dashboards in minutes without the need for any code. At the same time, the improper use of Excel is responsible for millions of hours of unnecessary work and operational risk, which has led to billions of dollars of losses. In this video, I have a conversation with my data analyst friend, Martin Chan, who transitioned from a non-technical position to an Excel user and subsequently to a data analyst and strategy consultant, where he uses R as his primary tool. We discussed some of the benefits of moving from Excel to a tool such as R, as well as some of the use cases where Excel is still relevant. Businesses and data professionals serious about analyzing their data should look to augment their skills with tools such as R or Python, which provide much better solutions than Excel for advanced Excel users. This trend is rapidly picking up pace across organizations, and jobs for advanced Excel users are rapidly being eliminated. This means that 95% of Excel's functionality is not worth learning, as it sits in the gray zone that's too advanced for beginners and not as good as R or Python. R and Python can seem intimidating, especially if you're simultaneously trying to learn how to implement a deep neural network machine learning algorithm, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's an increasing demand for data skills that have nothing to do with complex machine learning. If you're keen to learn the Excel skills which are still relevant, as well as how you can supercharge your existing Excel skills with a tool like R, then check out the link below for free training. If you're new to this channel and you're keen to learn the latest tips, tricks, and tools for working more effectively with data, please hit the subscribe button for weekly videos. So I am joined here today again by my data analyst friend, Martin Chan.
Hello.
Now, you may remember Martin Chan from one of the other videos that we put together, which was on how Martin went from being a philosopher to a data analyst. So if you haven't seen that already, definitely check that out. I'll leave a link around somewhere here where you can check that out. So lately, there's been a lot of different videos and articles talking about how Excel is basically being replaced by things like R and Python. Now, I know you and I are both big R users ourselves, and so I just wanted to kind of first of all get your take on what are some of the real benefits that you see, and what are some of the things that you find that are really so much easier using R than over using Excel?
Yep, I think that's a good question. So one of the things that like with R that makes it so much easier, I guess if we're talking about ease, it's about automation. Say because with R, if you figure out how to do a certain analysis, you'd be able to loop it, or in R it would apply it to different subsets of the data, to different data. Say you've got a trending data that comes in like every month or every quarter, you'd be able to just rerun that. And that's the ease point. But there's also the power point, which is that with R, it's just so easy to build models and to build dashboards through Shiny. And nowadays, you've got these packages which is called Book Down, which you can create a book. Block Down, which you can create a blog. And then you can so easily create all sorts of different outputs through R Markdown, like HTML websites or and all that. So that is just something that you can't do. Well, it's not just you can't do it as easily, it's that you can't do it in Excel. So those are the benefits, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, some people might look at this and kind of argue. It's like, well, okay, well, with Excel, you've got things like VBA. So why wouldn't you use VBA for like loops and automation and those kind of things?
Well, so personally, because I started my first language with code is VBA. So one of the things with VBA is it's not as fast as R. And then there's also the code style, if you like, because in R you've got the tidyverse what we sometimes call dplyr or pipe syntax,
Yeah.
which makes it a lot easier to really see where the analysis is going.
Yeah.
In VBA, I don't think it's that simple, and also the underlying fact that R is built for statistical analysis, so that you've got a vectorization, which
Yeah.
makes it really intuitive to do the sort of analysis that
Yeah.
I don't think VBA is built for that. I
Yeah.
mean, for me
Yeah.
personally, I use VBA when I need to format a lot of sheets or say do an automated cleanup of the data that I would need to do in Excel.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
mean, just to give people a little bit more context, right? Because they might not necessarily have seen the syntax for either R or VBA. And so when we talk about having cleaner syntax and being easier for doing certain things, I think it's probably worth to mention as well that programming languages have power over the particular job that they're doing through something called the object model, right? So when you're dealing with things like Excel,
Yeah.
you've got objects like worksheets and
Arrays,
cells,
yeah.
Arrays, and
Yeah.
different things like that. But oddly enough, even though that all the data that you work with normally is in a table kind of structure,
Yeah.
VBA has no easy way of actually accessing that. So VBA doesn't actually work with tables, which is seems kind of strange,
That's
right?
a good point. Yeah.
Whereas with R, you have a data frame,
Yeah.
and so everything that you do in the code, you can directly refer to, like a named column, to a table effectively.
So the data frame refers to the actual data table, and because I think, as I guess what you're saying is that in Excel when you're trying to refer to stuff as an object, you're referring to the cells, and sometimes that brings with it the format of the cells as well. So
Yes.
you're not actually referring to that data. So it's basically not just built for that. I guess the argument, like going back to your question of is Excel dead? It's oh god, I forgot my point.
That's
So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
I mean, I guess VBA has its points, but not as a data analytics
Yeah.
language. Right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So now I was just going back to the question of is Excel dead? So VBA and R and maybe Python, they're all languages, right? So if you're going to learn and implement a language anyway, why not use one that has more power, is easier to use, than to just use VBA? Because with VBA you can't. I don't know how would you be able to build like models in VBA? Probably not as.
It's not a good idea to, right? I guess is the basic answer of
Yeah.
it. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of clever people who have figured out how to do all kinds of things. I know for myself, I probably built far too much in VBA, and then I probably should have. But having experienced both, I would never go back and do any of those kind of things again.
Yeah.
In VBA.
Yeah. So, I mean, just going back to the question then, like, do you think there's still a role with Excel?
Yeah, so I think that's interesting actually. So I think the thing is this, right? So we were talking before, and the thing is, Excel has got 750 million users, and there isn't really any learning curve required for Excel,
Yeah.
right? And so anybody can pick it up and use it with whether they have any training or not, which is kind of a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because I think as a data professional, as a data analyst, a lot of the pain basically comes from when people don't
Use Excel.
use proper data practices, which is very, very easy to do in Excel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, are you talking about like maybe merged cells?
Oh, merge cells. Merge cells is evil word, right?
Yeah.
So
So I guess the context behind this is, say, if you have a merged cell table in Excel,
Yeah.
if you're trying to read stuff from it, say in any other R or maybe Python, the code wouldn't know which cell to pick it from because it's merged,
Yes.
and the cell references get all mucked up.
yeah,
in
it
that
could
process,
come
so
across as a corrupt data set or something like that.
generally bad
Because it's not a
practice.
proper table anymore,
Yeah.
right? So the merge cells are
Yeah.
the major pain of like any data analyst who's actually tried to use some
Yeah.
automation or anything like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So going back to what you said earlier, so one of the main benefits of Excel is that loads of people use it.
yes,
And I guess from my own experiences that, loads of people use it. Anybody knows how to use it. And like say even I work with art on the day to day, if I need to share something to a client or maybe to a colleague really quickly, I wouldn't send them anything in other formats apart from Excel because it's so easy.
Yeah.
Every computer has Excel. So it feels like, the question is Excel dead? It feels to me that Excel is like undead, right? So you can't ever do away with Excel. It's always going to be there because
Yeah.
you can't really imagine a situation where everyone would be using R or,
Yeah.
you know.
Because not everybody's going to learn code. Not
Yeah.
everybody is going to be a professional data analyst, right?
Mhm.
So, I think there's definitely the case for Excel to be able to do kind of basic things like basic pivots and different things like that. And be
Yeah.
able to just being able to look at the data without having to really understand anything too technical. It is a universal kind of distribution format.
Yeah.
Now, in saying that, it's not the only distribution format,
Yeah.
right? So these days, if you are using something like R and you've got R Markdown, you can put in a data table and put a download data button, right? And so then you can send your files, and maybe you can export them in something universal, like an HTML file, which is
Yeah.
a web page.
Yeah.
A web page is actually even more universal than Excel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because everybody's got a web browser. I mean, like websites and stuff
Yeah.
like that are the kind of new universal
Yeah.
format. But the thing is that people want it out into Excel because, they
They can
still
also
want
play
to,
around with it.
They can play
Yeah.
around with it, right? So they can play around with it themselves. They can do their own calculations, do a few pivots, all this kind of thing, nice and easily.
Yeah.
So if you add a download button there, then
Yeah.
they can have both options, right?
Yeah.
You can present everything nice and easily in a, say, R Markdown
Yeah.
document, which, quite frankly, is far quicker to put together and publish
Yeah.
than, say, an Excel file. You'll get more advanced visualizations and all that sort of thing. And then, still have the download data button available for people who want to do
Yeah.
that as well. So that is another option.
Yeah.
But, in saying that, a lot of times if you're working with clients, it can be difficult sometimes to convince them and move them away from getting stuff directly in these Excel formats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, what you're saying is that you've got this download button, but ultimately what you're downloading is still in Excel format, or maybe
Maybe a CSV, but
Yeah.
what are people going to open that up in?
yeah,
They're going to
it's
open
gonna
it up
still
in Excel,
it's
basically.
gonna be in Excel. Yeah. So maybe we pretty much agree that you can't really get rid of Excel, right? So I don't know. Maybe is it? Would you say that the most important thing that I would assume is that you want basically Excel users, not necessarily analysts or data scientists, to use Excel in a way that makes it work best with, say, R or maybe SAS or Python or whatever other software that data analysts are using. So it's about the best
Yeah.
practice, making sure that you don't do stuff like merging cells, for instance.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Yeah, I think it is kind of tricky in a way. I think that if you are working with Excel and you're working with data, and let's say you're not a data professional, but data is being collected, and you know that that data is going to be has to be analyzed later down the track. The data needs to come through in a certain format, which
Yeah.
is going to be easy for the computers to pick up and
Yeah.
read. And if you chuck in things like extra spaces, merge cells,
Yeah.
like various formatting things into your files, then it can make those files very, very difficult to read.
I
And-
thought another one, like
Yeah.
inserting text boxes
Uh-huh.
in the middle of the Excel. That
Yeah.
that would just make it. You've got additional decorative elements in the Excel sheet,
Yeah.
which doesn't help with the automation process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, absolutely. I think, one of the reasons people use Excel though is kind of for the formatting bit, right? They use it because you can do all these kind of weird, quirky
It's
things
ease of use. Yeah.
to kind of hack it to make it look like a little bit more kind of fancy,
Yeah.
right? And the thing is, if you're going to format it, it's like, okay, that's fine if all you're going to do is print it. But if you need to give it to someone to actually analyze the data,
Yeah.
don't add all that formatting and everything to it because it's just going to make a lot of work.
Yeah.
And you are not going to be popular with any of your analyst team or
Yeah.
IT teams or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
I suppose so I guess the sort of lesson is to have the end user in mind, because if you're trying to create an Excel table, maybe it's just like a cost sheet that you're not likely to analyze it, you can decorate it, add icons, or do anything with it if you want. You can merge cells or do anything. But say if you know that that data is going to go somewhere,
Yeah.
then there are certain best practices that you should follow.
Yeah, I'd say just never merge cells. I mean, to be fair, there are some alternatives to that as well. So, for instance, you can use an option called center across selection, which means you avoid doing the horrible thing of merging cells and still get the formatting you want without kind of corrupting the data for any other future purposes. So I'd say, that's probably like a relatively easy win. But yeah, as you're saying, depending on what the intent of your actual file is for, just keep that in mind, because if you do too many things to it, there's lots of things which just, again, goes off and makes it unusable, or a lot of work for people to retransform and clean up to make it work again.
So what's the conclusion? Is Excel dead? Probably not.
So just wanted to point out as well that we know what it's like to only have Excel to work with before we knew things like R and these different types of tools.
I mean, we both started off using Excel.
Yeah, we both started using
at the very beginning.
At the beginning. And I'd say that, Excel is a really nice place for people to start. If anything, in hindsight, if you're going back and giving advice to your past self.
There would be loads of stuff that I wouldn't do back then.
Yeah, I mean, there's basically, I'd say, if you're going to start, you can start on Excel, but if you're really serious about this, move to something else faster, right? So just don't stick on it for too long.
I guess especially when you're in the sort of data analyst or maybe you're hoping to move to data scientist position, you should, move away from Excel, or at least
you need the right tools.
Yeah,
you need the right tools, absolutely. So start on Excel, but you shouldn't really be spending more than, like, say, if you can't pick up Excel within, say, a few weeks or something like that, then maybe you really need to be doing something else. But yeah, after you've kind of mastered the basic skills, if you know how to do a VLOOKUP and a pivot table, then you kind of actually have the foundational skills to move on to something else, right?
I guess this is possibly an idea for another video, but would you have not done VBA if you were to go back to that time?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's definitely things that I used VBA for that I shouldn't have. But that's not to say that VBA is completely useless. But for a lot of the things that you do as an analyst, you probably shouldn't, right? And again, like you said, perhaps we can have another discussion at some point. If anybody else is interested in that, please let us know if you'd like to hear that conversation of, what the VBA is maybe good for and what it isn't good for, and how we made that transition as well. And, I think on top of that, there's a lot of people who maybe haven't done any coding, not even VBA. And, there's another question of whether, should VBA be a kind of starting point for coding? And so maybe that's something that we can dive into as well. So one of the things that we're talking about as well was that, so my wife is an accountant actually, and she still uses Excel for doing like her own personal accounts. And so I've taken a look at these kind of situations and taken a look at, well, would this be more efficient using something like R or something instead? And the answer for that is actually no, right? And so it's probably worth discussing actually why that is, right?
Well, I've got one reason, which is I also do my own expenses in Excel, which is you can imagine a table where in each table I've got a date, type of transaction, where I'm buying the stuff, what I actually buy, and the amount, right? So I'm just thinking, how would I do this in R, say if I want to enter a new line of data? And also say if you could suggest, why don't you just transpose, like take your bank statement and then import it so you can use it as your expense sheet. But if I want to add one cash transaction into it, do I need to update my code? So I guess Excel makes it easy for that.
Yeah, so that's probably one of the key things actually. Excel is a mechanism that you can actually enter data.
Yeah.
You can update data, which is not something that you can actually do in R.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you get to R, it's really for the analysis part. Technically, you shouldn't really be creating any data in R, right?
Yeah.
You're at least not creating the source data anyway. You're taking raw data and then doing your analysis and processes on that. Whereas, when you're, say, analyzing your bank statements and like you said, you're entering one extra line in, or you're manually coding it. So you're categorizing each item and you're manually doing that.
Yeah.
Well, that needs to be stored somewhere,
Yeah.
right? It needs to be stored in some sort of file. And, so Excel is a very convenient platform and
For
way
data
of doing
entry, for data input, yeah.
Yeah, for data entry. And so there's a lot of situations like that where I think Excel really does make a lot of sense. Now, I would kind of warn in stuff as well that, I've created some other videos as well,
Yeah.
like on Excel versus Google Sheets.
Yeah.
And the basic gist of it is that Excel is pretty good for entering data if you've got like one person kind of maintaining that data, because you're not worried about clashing transactions and all this kind of stuff like that, or reconsolidating multiple files. But a lot of times when people think, okay, why are you going to use Excel for data entry? A lot of times what I've seen in organizations is that they'll take a file, split it into lots of Excel files, send it out to lots of people, get them to update them, and then you have to glue them all back together again.
Oh, no,
Yeah, oh no,
Yeah.
right? So,
Who's gonna merge that data, I guess?
And the thing is that if all the data comes back perfectly and people manage to not corrupt or mess up the files, then, like merging that together is like pretty easy. Right? It's like, okay, well, that's one line of R code and you've remerged all of that, right? But the problem is that it almost never comes back completely clean.
Yeah. Sometimes he'll put like comments in a separate cell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or just merge the cell.
Yeah, exactly. Well, merge cells, or like inserting a new column.
Looks nicer.
Or,
Let's merge the cell.
I'll just add like a little notes column over here. It's like, oh, I don't like the formatting of this. Let's drop the, let's insert a few rows at the top. And all these kind of things, which basically mess up the import, and you can't bring the files back together again, right? And so you either need to kind of go by one, and like every time a file fails, you basically have to send it back to the person to go fix the file, or you need to go and fix it yourself.
Just fix it manually, yeah.
Right.
It doesn't scale, I guess.
It doesn't scale, right? So that's probably the one key problem with using Excel as a data entry system, right? And if you want more info about that, you can check out the other video I did on Excel versus Google Sheets. And besides that, there's, I guess, you could argue you could use like maybe SharePoint, a database, or kind of different solutions like that.
Or create forms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So creating forms, but again, Excel you can kind of create forms, but it's not a very good. It's not definitely not the best platform for creating forms.
Yeah.
So again, you could look into creating forms, but there's other tools for doing that.
Yeah. Depends on what kind of data you really need to collect. Say if I'm organizing, I've once organized like a sort of semi-big event, and I need all the participants' details. I just create a Google form, which is quite handy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Google Forms are probably one of the best, easiest ways of capturing data in a clean, because it's got good data, it's got good data validation basically, much better than the sort of data validation built into Excel. So that's a good option there.
Yep.
You've also got things like if you're on the Microsoft stack, and like within an organization, sometimes you don't have access to Google Forms. You have SharePoint and you have forms that come with SharePoint. So those are kind of built in as well. Like Microsoft actually has, I think they have their own version of Google Forms as well now. So there's a product there, although I don't think it's that well known just yet. But that is another product as well. So yeah.
So were there other reasons why Excel might be better for like accounting purposes?
So other reasons why accounting, it's a lot of the kind of flow that people go through for accounting purposes does flow quite nicely in Excel. Whereas if you were doing it in R, I'd say.
When you mean flow, you mean say sometimes I would have income and then the number of items for income and then expense and then items for expense. Do you mean that sort of flow?
Yeah, so you've got these kind of calculations which
Yeah.
go down the sheet in which
Yeah.
you're kind of summing each thing up, and then you kind of got these subtotals and you're adding them together. R will enable you to handle much more data, but it doesn't really have that same kind of format that accountants might be
Yeah.
used to. You have to kind of flip it around and do it differently, right? So, and now if you've already used R, effectively you know this as a mutate statement, right? Where you're adding all the calculations across the columns instead of kind of vertically, you're adding them horizontally,
Yeah.
which is slightly different, but it has its own benefits.
Yeah.
Are you interested in working with data? Do you want to learn how you can start getting deeper insight with tools such as R? Or see how the best new techniques for working in Excel can eliminate all your manual tasks within just a few hours? If so, check out the links below for free training videos. If you found this video helpful, please leave a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.